In this video, I will present the integrate model, which was previously known as eTransport. I will go through the installation process and give a presentation of how to use it. You can find more information about the model on the model page on SINTEF website. Before starting the installation process, you should get in touch with Magnus Askeland. He will register you as a user, and once you're registered, you will receive an email similar to this one. The email details the steps to follow in order to install integrate. First, you need to make sure that you have Windows 10 and Microsoft Visio installed in a 32-bit version. Once this is done, you can follow the link. It will take you to a SharePoint. Here, you should synchronize. And once it's synchronized, you will have the installation files on your computer. So here are the files on my computer. And you should make sure that you do right-click on the folder and check always keep on this device. This will ensure that all the files are downloaded and available. Once the files have been downloaded and are available, you can proceed with installation by simply running the file called install, like this. Okay, and that's it. The integrate model is now installed on your computer. Now that integrate has been installed, we can run Visio and open a case. So when you open Visio, we'll see this. You need to go in New, Templates here, and open eTransport here. It's important to follow this order and not use one of the other eTransport windows here for it to function properly. So once you do this, you'll get here, and you can open pre-existing cases that you've made or create a new one. Here I don't have any one, so I will just create a new one and open it. Now this case is created, and first I can show you the different elements of eTransport or integrate. You have the main working area here where you will drag and drop your elements. Here at the bottom is the result windows. Once you've created your energy system and run your operation or investment analysis, it's here that you will see the different resulting investments and see the different operational and total cost, etc. On the left, we find the shapes, which holds all the modules that we can use and drop onto the main area. And at the top is the Visio interface. What you can do is go in add-ins, which hold specific function for integrate. So for example, we can save a case, which is recommended to do regularly. And you find also other important functions. It's here that you will be able to run the investment analysis, export or import a case. If you want to collaborate, maybe you want to send the case to someone else, you will need to, and for this you will need to export a case, and your person can then import it. And you can also export the input and the output to Excel. You have different options for how to display the elements. You can play around with this. It's not the most important. The edit stochastic data, I will come back to it later. And in data, you can define important elements for your case that are listed here. So the number of time steps, the currency, the years, segments, investment options, etc. So if you click, I will go through each one of them. If you go to number of time steps, you see the number of time steps inside each period. So here, each period will be a day. with 24 hours. Currency is Norwegian kroners here. You can change it to euro or US dollars. And here are years. So you can define different years, and then the investment will happen for each period, which is defined as the interval between 2 years. So here we can define also a new year. And for example, we define it as, we say it's 2020, we get 5 years interval here. And there's a lot of elements that you can define for each years. So I can go through the main ones. Here, for example, is the CO2 penalty, which can be important depending on your case, and defines how much you will pay for each kiloton of CO2 emissions. You can also set a cap on emissions and different goals. You can also define factors that will affect how the base electricity price or loads are affected throughout the years. So here it's set to 1, which means it will stay constant. For example, if you set the L-chant factor to 1.5, it means that if you have an electricity load here, or all your electricity loads, let's say in 2010 it was a factor of 1, then you have a certain time series for your loads. And in 2020, the year we define now, if we set it to 1.5, then the load in 2020 will be 1.5 times this time series. And you can do that for different inputs. So it can be the loads, the electricity price, for gas and heat as well, oil price, etc. So you have a lot of different factors you can play around. Okay, once we've defined this year, we can continue. We can define segments. So segments are, so here's a whole year, or it says a whole year, but we can say it's just a season, for example. We can define it as winter. And then it will have not 365 days anymore. And so I don't know, it would be maybe 100. And you can do the same thing. You can have different factors for each periods inside a year. Each segment will have 24 periods as we've defined before. We can define a new one, for example, summer. We'll get 100 days as well. You could define different elements here to fit each, in this case, season. You could also be something else on seasons, depending on your case. Okay, and let's define a new season, last season, as a mid season with the rest of the days. And let's keep the rest the same. So now we have enough days for the whole year. And you could you can define different, if you don't want to use seasons, but something with a higher or lower resolution, it's up to you. Then we can look at investments. Here it doesn't really make sense to look at this now because we don't have any elements in the work area. And I will come back to it later. Case values and default values are nothing you should be concerned with, and you should not have to change those values. In case of doubt, you can also just ask us. And scenarios, I will come back to that a bit later. Now that we've seen the interface, we can have a look and try to create a small energy system to show you how you can make your own. So for example, I will go in electricity, in the shapes, and I will select an electricity source. Once you drag and drop it onto the working area, you can choose how you want to name it. So here I'll just call it electricity market, for example, or electricity grid, whatever. And you can define the cost. So there is a default value set, but you can change it according to your needs, and the maximum outtake. If you not define anything, then it will use some default values that are defined outside. And you can also load from a file. So if you have a text file holding a list of the values for the 24 time steps, you can load from a file, and it will allow you to input the data a bit faster. Okay, you can have a bus bar, and it's the same. Just this way, no input data for this one. Then we can click on the shape, click again to select the connector, and if we click on the there are two gray rounds here, circles. One is connected to the square, and you can't move that one, but you can move the other one. So you can move it and connect it to other elements. So here we connect it to the bus. And to make a really simple case, we'll just take a load and connect it in the same way. And the load is the same. It has also inputs that you can define. And also you can use a text or a CSV file or text file for defining the value a bit faster. Values a bit faster. And you can do the same. Click a first time to get the whole shape, and then click a second time to select the connector. Now you have a very simple system, and I can show you this how to run a case. In this case, it's very simple, but just to show you, to illustrate, go to Tools, Run Investment Analysis, and we have 6 operational analysis for the because we have 3 seasons that we've defined, and 2 periods intervals between the years, because we have defined 2010, 2015, 2020. That makes 2 periods, which are from 2010 to 2015 and from 2015 to 2020. We can define the discount rate, or the rate of return, and how many investment plans we want. In this case, we have not defined investments. And we can run it. Okay, the process is finished. We've got the results back. You can see a log of what happened here in this window. It will tell you what happened if you have a problem, or if you want to see some details. For example, we have the 6 analysis we had here. In each case, the objective or the contribution to the objective of each module. So in this case, a lot of those modules are not used, but we see the electricity supply, for example. Okay, we can close it, and you see here that some results are presented, and we can see some operational results as well. The L cost, which is an input, but if you want to look at output, the add usage is constant in this very simple case. Let's now take a look at this energy system that I've expanded a bit. We have still an electric side, and now we have also some heat demands that are supplied through either electric heating or burning of gas or biomass in boilers or CHPs. We also have some storage now. So if you run the investment analysis, you may get a message like this. And this is because that means you've not defined all the elements inside the components. So here it tells me that I've not defined the emission coefficients for the CCGT plant, for example, and gives a list of every parameter that I've not set. And then what happens is that you can still run the investment analysis, and it will take default values that are defined outside in the code. It's most likely not what you want to do, and so you should probably go back to each component and make sure that you type the value that you want to use. We can now take a look at how to define stochastic data as well as investment options. So in order to define those things, so for stochastic data, you can do it either here at the top or inside each component with a right click. Right click is also the way to go into each component to redefine some values in edit data. For stochastic data, it's the over button here. And so here you can choose which parameter you want to affect. And you find the different segments that you've defined earlier. And you can define, so for example, here I can define the electric demand for each season separately. So I first select the season, then I go in here, I type the values I want, then I change the season, and I define it again. What you can do is also load from a file. If you have a file with a list with a number of time steps you need, that can make it easier to save this information and make the data handling a bit easier. So this is for the segments, but you can also define several stochastic scenarios. And for this, you want to go in here, and you'll need to have defined at least 2 periods, so 3 years for this. And here you can define your scenarios. So if I click on the plus here, I can add a scenario, etc. You can do as many as you want, and you can change their name and remove them. And here are the weights of each scenario. So it should be 1. The total should be 1 for 1 period. Okay, so now if you go back into here, we can define it as well for each scenario now, and for each season again. Okay. And then when you have defined the stochastic scenarios, you will want to make sure that you check the box here before you run your investment analysis in order to take into account the stochastic data. Otherwise, it will just take into account the data that's in the normal window here. Okay, now we can look at how to define investment options. And so there are several steps. What you can do first is go here into edit investments and create a new investment. So in our case, for example, we can make the battery an investment. So we name the investment battery, and we can define the cost, lifetime, and annual expenses. So operation and maintenance costs, etc. And you can create several, and you have to, once you've created them, you need to assign them to elements in your working area. So here we want to look at to do that for the battery. So we go to edit data, investment and seasonal parameters at the top, and we can say that it is included in the investment battery. Now, the investment option that you had created is linked to this component. So this component is part of this investment option. And you can include several components inside one investment option. You can define that an investment option or that a component is only in the same window here. You can define that the component is available only in some segments or only from a certain year, or disappears at some time, etc. Yes, once you've defined that, you will see that it becomes dashed lines, meaning it's an investment option. And you'll also see that in the run investment analysis, you now have an investment matrix. And the number of operational analysis have increased because you will have operational analysis for each combination of investments. And here it has doubled because we have now one investment, and so it will run the analysis with and without the battery for each period. We can create another investment. We can say, for example, that this CCGT plant is also an investment option. So let's create it. For this example, I won't use numbers that really make sense, but just to illustrate, we can include it in the investment that we created. And now it becomes dashed as well. If we go to here, we now see a matrix that's a bit bigger. So it's important to understand how this investment matrix works, because it allows you to refine the way you set up the investments. So you have two metrics, one with the technologies and one with the periods. In the one with technologies, if the squares are red, it means that the investments are mutually exclusive. So here, that means that I will be having either a battery or the CCGT. If I click on them, it becomes green. That means they are not mutually exclusive anymore. And the number of operational analysis needed has increased, because now we have one more case to take into account. It's one, the other, or both, or none. I've added a third investment option, a large battery here, to showcase in a better way the investment logic that we can define. So if we go here before running the investment analysis, we now have those matrices. So by the way, if you make changes with the left click, you can go back to default by clicking on the right click. So you can change here. It's as shown before. It's red if it's exclusive, green if it's not exclusive, and you can have numbers. If you make it a 1 in this square, that means that the CCGT here, if you invest in it, then you will have to invest in the battery. So it forces, if you choose CCGT, it forces the battery to be chosen as well. If you define it like this, now if you invest in CCGT, it will have to invest either in a battery or a large battery. And if you make it a higher number, a 2 for example here, then it will have to invest in both a battery and a large battery. We can reset it. In the yearly matrix, if you can also define with numbers, and that means that it will also be forced to invest in this technology in this period. Thank you for following this video. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us, either Magnus Askeland or myself. at the following email addresses.